Welcome back. We are continuing to monitor Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Joining me now is someone who knows a little something about foreign policy and the intel community, and it's Leon Panetta. He was, of course, Defense Secretary and CIA Director at different times under President Obama. He was also previously a White House Chief of Staff, OMB Director, Budget Committee Chairman, Member of Congress, served in a Republican White House, Democratic White House. Anyway, I'd run out of time if I keep doing the resume. Nice to see you, sir. Let me start with a basic question to educate us all. Why do you have a security clearance still, and what's the purpose of it?
The former directors of the CIA retain a security clearance in the event that the director of the CIA wants to call you either back to Washington or call you to brief you on what's going on and try to seek your advice. That's usually the purpose of having that kind of clearance. You know, when I was director, I called upon my former directors, actually brought them to meetings at Langley and briefed them, had staff there brief them on sensitive issues, and then kind of open it up to get their advice.
How does that process work when you leave government? So you retain a clearance. Do you check in? Do you have to file a disclosure form once a year? Do people need to know about your finances? You know, what are the rules for sort of ex officios?
You know, Chuck, I don't know what the rules are.
Oh, okay. I didn't know either. That's why I'm asking. Yeah, that's why I don't know. What is I guess what we're trying to find out is the president's threat meaningful?
Well, obviously the president has, I would assume, the authority to actually revoke somebody's clearance if that's what he wants to do. Obviously, the way the rules are with regards to clearances, you usually don't lose a clearance unless you've abused it in some way.
Gotcha.
Either revealing classified information or having some personal problems that could raise questions about whether you could retain classified information. But to just do it because you don't particularly like the comments that somebody's making with regards to your presidency, that's probably an abuse of that responsibility.
And is it only the CIA that gets this? And is it only members of the high-level members of Intel? Or what? Like, when do you stop keeping that clearance? Deputy director, next level down? What is that? What is that? What's your understanding?
I don't know all the rules as to who retains those security clearances or not. I do know that former directors of the CIA have that clearance.
Let me move to this issue of trying to figure out what President Trump and Vladimir Putin talked about in that 2-hour meeting. You've seen a lot of back and forth. Secretary Pompeo seems to indicate he thinks he has a pretty good understanding. Do you believe him? You know, I watched the testimony. I think Mike Pompeo did the best job he could under the circumstances. Obviously, he wasn't present at that meeting between Putin and Trump. You know, it's obvious that, you know, it's hard to really be able to understand just exactly what was discussed and what was agreed to. I think what you're seeing here is kind of a disconnect. It's a disconnect between Mr. Trump and the tweets and the discussions and the things he likes to do, and what Mike Pompeo called U.S. policy, which is what he and Jim Mattis and I guess Bolton to some extent all agree is U.S. policy. And that's much more consistent with what the United States has stood for. But there is this disconnect, and I think Mike Pompeo obviously had a difficult time responding to Chairman Corker's comments about why is there this disconnect with a president who says what he says and yet what you say about U.S. policy. And I don't think Mike gave a very good answer on that one. There was Politico reported on something today called a special collections service at your former employer over in Langley there, the CIA, where obviously
that the U.S. government essentially has the ability to find out through perhaps taps of Russian officials, orders that are sent around who Putin briefed and things like that, that actually the CIA that Gina Haspel might actually have a better idea right now what happened in that meeting than Mike Pompeo. Is that how good your service, this sort of special collection service is at the CIA?
Well, there's not much question without going into classified information that there are.
I'm hoping to get you to lose you'll lose your security clearance in this in this segment, sir.
That's right.
I'm teasing, yes. But go ahead and tell me about it.
You know, there's a lot of capabilities there, and obviously there's no question in my mind that the Russians probably did tape that conversation. Whether the Finns did it, whether other intelligence services did it, whether the CIA had any capability there, whether NSA did, obviously we don't know the answer to that. But there's not much question in my mind, knowing the intelligence people and how they think, that somebody has some kind of capability to know what went on in that room between President Trump and President Putin.
And obviously, without speculating, we don't know. But if it's something that's not what we're being told, that obviously would be explosive. Let me ask you to comment on something a former, it would be successor of yours, said. John Brennan said this at the Helsinki press conference. Donald Trump's press conference performance in Helsinki rises to and exceeds the threshold of, quote, high crimes and misdemeanors. It was nothing short of treasonous. Not only were Trump's comments imbecilic, he is wholly in the pocket of Putin. Republican patriots, where are you? I know you and John Brennan don't use the same colorful language all the time. But do you agree with his sentiment there?
I'm careful, I guess, as a lawyer, to use that kind of word without knowing whether or not you could prove that to be the case. And I have some question whether or not the President of the United States betrayed this country and deliberately tried to betray it. I think the bigger issue is
you
whether
think that
or
happened
not,
on that stage? You're saying the president. Did you feel like the president betrayed the country on that stage, sharing that stage with Putin and saying what he said about the intel community?
I think the president made a comment. He then came back to this country and betrayed that, or tried to correct the comment that he made. I think it's difficult to kind of nail down that kind of charge against the president of the United States. I think, on the other hand, the real issue is whether or not the president, as president of the United States, exercised his responsibility correctly as president in dealing with Russia and in dealing with the issues that were involved in that discussion. I think that is an area that can very well be questioned and has been questioned, not only by Democratic senators, but by Republican senators. I think that's what we ought to focus on.
What is the average intelligence officer who commutes to work every day, back and forth from Langley to wherever they live in suburban Virginia? What does that do to their morale?
Well, you don't like to hear the President of the United States say that he trusts Russia more than he trusts our own intelligence people when it comes to the issue of Russian interference in our election. And when the president says that, and you're an agent or an officer in the CIA, and you're out there putting your life on the line, trying to gather intelligence on what our enemies are up to, and you hear the president say that, there's no question it impacts on morale. At the same time, I know these people pretty well, and they're going to continue to put their lives on the line. They're going to continue to do their job. But does it impact on their morale? You're damn right it does.
I'm curious where you stand on this issue. You've seen the Salt Lake Tribune paper essentially called on Jon Huntsman to resign because of what happened in Russia. Some have called on Dan Coats to resign on principle. Neither one of them have done it. Jon Huntsman gave a very, I thought, thoughtful rebuttal. It was an interesting rebuttal that he made. I think an interesting counterpoints. Where do you sit on this issue? You've served in administrations where you've disagreed on policy. When do you think a public servant and you've served in so many roles, appointed and elected, that a public servant should use its threat of resignation as a statement?
Chuck, I think you have to look at this particular administration and this particular president, who's obviously very erratic and unpredictable in the way he handles himself. And for me, frankly, I find some degree of comfort in having people like Coates, Huntsman, Pompeo, Mattis there to try to provide at least some guidance, some advice, some ability to try to protect this president from making a terrible decision with regards to this country. So, yeah, I know there's going to be disagreements, and every individual has to make up their own mind as to whether or not that line has been crossed in terms of their conscience. But I think in this situation, I would be a hell of a lot more comfortable having those people in their positions than not in their positions.
Leon Panetta, a lot of formers, but you're always a walnut farmer to me. And I know that's always what you want to be known as. So, Leon Panetta, thank you, sir. Always good to hear you come on and share your views.
Thanks, Chuck.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.